That it's started. Yes. All right. So we are off and running for our broadcast of our next parasha. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. That was just last week. I know. It feels like a long time. It's been 2 weeks since we've been together to study for our Wednesday class. So I know that feels like a long time. It does to me too. But we've got a lot to get through because we're going to wrestle with the most painful part of this week's parasha. So we are in now parashat Vayishlach, and the story so far. Where are we? Well, we are in the end stage of the Jacob saga. You'll remember that 2 weeks ago, before we had our Thanksgiving break, Jacob had this issue with his brother Esau. We all remember, and had ended up having to flee / go look for a bride back in his mother's native land. And so Jacob went off, and then last week we didn't get a chance to study together, but hopefully you read and you also came to shul. You would have found out that he got married. He had a whole bunch of kids, and then he had trouble with his in-laws, with Lavan, and so he left, and we left with him waiting to see what would happen as he is crossing back into the land of his inheritance, the land of the covenant, the land of Israel, although still called Canaan at the time, and what will happen with his brother. And the whole beginning part of this parasha of Vayishlach is the semi-reconciliation between Jacob and Esau. I say semi-reconciliation because they don't kill each other, and that's a good thing, but they also don't end up best of buds. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but it's a lot better than it could have been. And at least Jacob is back at peace within his own land, or so it seems. And that's what leads us to chapter 34 in the book of Genesis, 34 in Bereshit, where we deal with the incident that takes place concerning Jacob's daughter Dinah. Indeed. Like I said, this is among the most painful sections. So we're going to read through the story first, and then we're going to come back and analyze it. But during the story, I want you to keep in mind this question. Whose fault is it?
You have to change the subject.
Right. Excuse me.
Red Tent is going to be on TV.
What's that?
The movie Red Tent is going to be on TV.
Oh, they made a movie of the Red Tent?
It's a made-for-TV movie, I think. And it's going to be on 2 nights, I think, the 9th and the 10th, or something like that, next week. So
the Red Tent, if you're not familiar with Anita Diamant's retelling of this tale, not my favorite thing that she wrote. I like many of her other books better. I think it was a very interesting telling of a story. I am personally not a big fan of the idea that this is a telling of this story. I think that fictionalizing the account in such an extreme way goes beyond the level of what could even be euphemistically called midrash, and especially its portrayal of Jacob and the brothers, who are not necessarily going to come off unscathed in this account, goes beyond a level that I'm comfortable with. But as a piece of fiction, I think it's an amazing work. I'm just not happy that she used the names from Tanakh for that piece of fiction. If they had been entirely renamed, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, I personally would have found it much more palatable. But
I couldn't get into it. I tried several times, and I couldn't get into it. I gave up on it.
Well, let's get down to the original story. Volunteer?
I'll try.
All right, thanks, Ria.
See how well I can read before I get dried out. Now Dinah, the daughter whom Leah had born to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, chief of the country, saw her, took her, and lay with her by force. Being strongly drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob, and in love with the maiden, he spoke to the maiden tenderly. So Shechem said to his father Hamor, get me this girl as a wife.
All right. So what happened? What just happened?
Well, first of all,
It was quick, short verses.
1, 2, 3.
Right.
And I don't remember it being that way. Maybe from things like The
Absolutely.
Red Tent, which I read many, many, many years ago. But this is just 1, 2, 3, and it's kind of strange.
It is extremely rapid in the way that the story unfolds. So, and I think that was a deliberate intent by how the telling was being crafted. So, but give me a synopsis in your own words, and I'm recognizing that your own synopsis is probably going to be longer than the telling that's in the Torah. But what would you say happened? If someone were to ask you, what happened to Dinah, or what happened with Dinah, what would you say?
She was raped.
She was raped.
She was raped?
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you sure?
Well, she was taken by
She was
force.
taken by force.
But he loves her.
That doesn't matter if she didn't want to, if she doesn't love him, first of all.
So it's
And if she had no idea what was going to happen to her.
so she doesn't seem to be a willing partner, even though he is in love with her. Was he in love with her before or after he raped her? At least sequentially by the text, it seems to be afterwards, right? It says that she goes out, he sees her, he takes her, he lays with her, and the phrase by force here is can be used to mean to humiliate, to humble, to debase, to demean. It's not a pleasant word. It doesn't necessarily mean force in a only could have been forceful way. There are other ways that he might have been abusing her, as it were, in this process. But it's definitely not a pleasant experience. And then he loves her, and then he speaks to her kindly, or speaks to her heart, a more literal translation, and then wants to marry her. Strange?
Yeah,
Yes.
maybe he
You
saw her
put the cart before the horse.
You put the cart before the horse. You're not, well, first of all, you're not supposed to take someone against their will
That's right.
at all.
That's
And
right.
secondly, having done so, does he really expect to be able to marry this woman? Does he?
But is she's going to reject him because of the circumstances?
But does he ask her to get married? Who does he ask to marry?
His father.
He goes to his father, and what does he say to his dad?
Get her from this.
Get her from me, right? So he's the prince. He's the son of the chief of the town. And so he asks his father, this girl, I've fallen in love with her dad. You know, I saw her standing there, and once I'd had my way with her, I realized I couldn't live without her. So go get her for me. You know, arrange this for me.
That's not the way,
That's not the way it's supposed to work?
No.
But
It's not-
if he had seen her from afar, and he had gone to his father and said, Dad, I've seen this girl from these people who have just shown up in our area, and she's wonderful, she's lovely, I'm in love with her. Please arrange a betrothal. That would have been normal, wouldn't it? I mean, the idea of having two fathers sit down together over a nice cup of tea and deciding whether or not their son and daughter should marry is a fairly standard feature in ancient and all the way through medieval and Renaissance societies. The papas would sit and they'd arrange. So him asking his father to do it is not necessarily so strange. It's the sequence I think that might be a bit more jarring.
How common was that kind of a situation in that society where women
arranging
were
a marriage?
taken by force and then suffered the consequences?
More common than we might like to think. So the idea that a woman might be taken by force was unfortunately a very common feature in the ancient world. I can't go on to say that rape was commonplace, but it certainly was not unusual by any stretch of the imagination, which is why the Torah will deal with it
Nothing has changed.
later in many unfortunate ways. You're absolutely right. It's still much more common than sometimes we'd like to admit, and it's still much more common than we certainly want it to be. But the idea that you could rape someone or take them captive and then make them a bride and then keep them as a wife is something we're going to see in the book of Deuteronomy as an option, even for the people of Israel. Right there's a whole section in the book of Deuteronomy that talks about if you take a woman captive during war and you bring her home and you decide that you want to make her a wife, these are the steps that you go through. Having killed her family and destroyed her town, you can now marry her, and these are the steps you would go through. So it's not that unusual that someone would think they could take a woman by force and then wed her. What may be unusual, in fact, is the fact that there seems to be that there's some tenderness from this man, that it says that he loves her and it says that he speaks to her heart. I mean, that may be unusual. He's the prince of the realm, as it were. He could have taken her by force and kept her by force. Why bother being nice to her at all? Shall we see what happens?
Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but since his sons were in the field with his cattle, Jacob kept silent till they came home. Then Shechem's father Hamor came to Jacob to speak to him. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons, having heard the news, came in from the field. The men were distressed and very angry, because he had committed an outrage in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing not to be done.
Okay, so why doesn't Jacob immediately confront the people of Shechem about this? What's that? He's outnumbered. He's vulnerable. He doesn't have the support of his family because they're out doing what shepherds do, which is tending the flocks, the herds, and all of that thing. And when they come back, something needs to be done, right? Because their sister, his daughter, has been taken, has been raped, has been taken by this foreigner. Something must be done. What should be done? Well, we don't know. Why would we expect them to know? Well, let's see what the decision is.
And Hamor spoke with them, saying, "My son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to marry with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You will dwell among us, and the land will be open before you. Settle, move about, and acquire holdings in it." Then Shechem said to her father and brothers, Do me this favor, and I will pay whatever you tell me. Ask of me a bride price ever so high, as well as gifts, and I will pay what you tell me. Only give me the maiden for a wife. Jacob said,
So what's the proposal? Quite literally?
Make a family out of the whole thing.
Yeah,
and I will pay you what you need as reparations.
Right. Lemonade, right? Okay, fine. Maybe this shouldn't have happened, but I will pay a bride price which will remove the guilt from this act, and we can be one big happy family, right? You can settle with us. We won't resent you as being strangers. We'll all be family. You'll be part of our town, part of our city, and everything will be perfect, right? That's the proposal. That's certainly what they're offering. And the response?
Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor, speaking with guile, because he had defiled their sister Dinah, and said to them, "We cannot do this thing, to give our sister to a man who is uncircumcised, for that is a disgrace among us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become like us, and every male among you is circumcised. We will give our daughters to you, and take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell among you and become as one kindred. But if you will not listen to us and become circumcised, we will take our daughter and go."
All right.
Why are the sons speaking instead of the father?
First question. Why are the sons talking? Shouldn't this be Jacob talking? But then again, what are the sons saying?
Well, the sons are setting up a scam.
From having read before and from this phrase that they're speaking with guile, we know that what they're saying is not 100% true. And more to the point, what we see them doing is a reflection of what their family has done now for 2 generations, right? Jacob dealt with his father with guile. That's what he says. You know, when I go to talk to my father and I'm dressed in the fake clothing, I'm going to be dealing with my father as a deceiver, and that's not appropriate. And the same verb is used. Similarly, when the servant Eliezer went to get a wife for Isaac and found Rivka at the well, who takes over the negotiations? Lavan, her brother, not her father. So there's a family history of both dealing with the problems with deceit, as well as having brothers speak when the father should be the one that is dictating the terms. But I don't think Jacob could have spoken here. For Jacob to have said this he would have had to have been honest to say it. And Jacob was not going to agree to this. Jacob knows that his daughter can't marry this guy Shem, that he cannot consent to it. On the other hand, he also knows that if he says no, they'll take her anyway. And so Jacob can't come up with a solution. And so the sons are stepping in. They're coming up with a solution.
Wasn't there time before to cook up the scheme? Or do you think this is just happening in real time?
I'm not sure whether they were discussing this before they came for the negotiations, or whether one of them is proposing. I think that there was a sense that they were able to collude. That
Jacob seemed surprised by what the aftermath of all this.
Well, let's get to the aftermath. Yeah. So let's unfold.
Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the youth lost no time in doing the thing, for he wanted Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most respected in his father's house. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the public place of their town and spoke to their fellow townsmen, saying, "These people are our friends. Let them settle in the land and move about in it, for the land is large enough for them. We will take their daughters to ourselves as wives and give our daughters to them. But only on this condition will the men agree with us to dwell among us and be as one kindred, that all our males become circumcised as they are circumcised. Their cattle and substance and all their beasts will be ours, if we only agree to their terms, so that they will settle among us." All who went out of the gate of his town heeded Hamor and his son Shechem, and all males, all those who went out of the gate of his town, were circumcised.
All right, so the townspeople of Shem get this bargain, which is, as long as all the guys circumcise themselves, then not only can Shem marry Dinah, but what else?
All the cattle and everything will.
Here's this guy Jacob and his family with all of this wealth that they have brought back. We'll get it. Right? If they marry into us, they will be absorbed into our community, into our city, and basically it will make all the rest of us wealthy as well. So, circumcision, small price to pay. That's the plan. What's that? You know, I've seen a lot of maybe suspicious faces around there. Do you think that maybe is a lot to ask?
I can't see that this whole town of men will go through something like that without a fight.
And yet they seem to, which, well, we'll come back to what that might indicate. All right, so in any event, whatever they're hoping to get from this doesn't quite work out the way they planned.
On the third day, when they were in pain, Simeon and Levi, two of Jacob's sons, brothers of Dinah, took each his sword, came upon the city unmolested, and slew all the males. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword, took Dinah out of Shechem's house, and went away. The other sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the town, because their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and asses, all that was inside the town and outside, all their wealth, all their children, and all their wives. All that was in the houses they took as captives and booty.
So what's the plan? Kill them all.
Yeah.
Right? Our sister was defiled, therefore the man who killed her, the man who defiled her should be killed. But we can't kill just him, because if we killed just him, the whole rest of the town would kill us. So therefore, kill the town. And the only way we can kill the town, being fewer in number than them and them being inside of a town and us not, is to get them to make themselves vulnerable. It's a good plan, isn't it? I mean, how else would they have been able to avenge their sister? And how else would they apparently have been able to get her back? Notice it says that they take her back, right? That they bring her out of the town. That implies that after, most likely after the rape, she didn't go home. She was abducted in addition to being raped and was being held captive, essentially. Although Shem had his own views of romance, but she was essentially being held captive in the town while all the negotiations were taking place. Which might give you another idea of what poor Jacob was going through. How do you negotiate with the kidnapper of your daughter to arrange a marriage without jeopardizing your daughter's life or losing your daughter forever to this rapist? Which is why his sons may have come up with this plan, that this was a way to save their sister, just by murdering the town. But Jacob's not 100% pleased with the outcome of this. Onward.
Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me, making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My men are few in number, so that if they unite against me and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed." But they answered, "Should our sister be treated like a whore?"
And that's the problem, right? He knows that they are incredibly vulnerable in terms of the size of their camp versus the rest of the nation. And if people say, look, this Jacob family are going around murdering towns, then that's the end. All it will take, a few of the city-states to band together and they can wipe out Jacob and his family in one day. And Jacob is very worried that will be the repercussions of this. But on the other hand, the brothers are very worried about what the repercussions would be if they did nothing to defend their sister. Just one little fact before we go into the commentators on all of this and trying to answer our question. Why are Shimon and Levi highlighted for this? What?
It makes a commentary here that they're her full brothers.
Exactly right. Right. So Shimon and Levi are the two of the full brothers of Dinah. That is to say, they share both Jacob as their father and Leah as their mother. And it's also important to note that in birth order, Reuben and Shimon and Levi are the first three that were born, which means they should be the first three in prestige or in rank. Reuben, we're going to see later, will ruin his chances of being a true leader. And Shimon and Levi are essentially ruining their chances of being true leaders here as well. And Jacob will remember this against them on his deathbed, that they lived by the sword, and that the blood that they shed was not right. Their intention was correct, but that the way they carried it out, the execution, pardon it, of the plan wasn't right.
Dina's brother, true brother, was Reuben.
Well, there were 6 of them that came from Leah.
The son of Jacob and Rachel.
Right. Well, there were other children that were born from Rachel and from Bilhah and Zilpah, the 2 handmaidens.
Right. The daughter, Dina,
Right.
and Reuben are the only ones. They're born from Rachel and
No,
Leah.
Leah. No, Shimon and Levi were also born from Leah. All right. Well, let's get the handouts out, and then we'll answer our question. Whose fault is all of this? Who caused this all to happen? Who's responsible? Who's to blame? All right, isn't that what we want to do? When we get a problem like this, we want to make sure we can pin the blame on someone. All right, so first, Shem, right? He's a rapist. It's me for my handwriting. He's a rapist. He's to blame for all of this. Any other candidates or participants that might also catch your attention as sharing some of the blame? Well, we are going to see that in our commentaries, you also get Jacob sharing some of the blame, and Leah, and Dinah.
Dina for being there.
We'll get there. And the whole town. So we're going to have to go through and figure out how these others might be considered to be to blame and what we do with these commentaries.
But when you say to blame, you mean for the initial incident?
We are focusing on the initial incident, meaning the rape itself.
Okay.
The rape itself. The consequences and subsequent things that go on afterwards, there's a whole nother line of discussion and commentary, but we're focusing on the initial crime. All right, Rhea, you still okay for reading, or you?
No, I'll pass now.
Okay. Would someone else like to chime in to read for our commentaries? Michael? Okay.
When Jacob built the altar in Shechem upon his return from Paddan Aram in Genesis 30-20, tells that he set up an altar there and called it El, God of Israel. Vayishlach said he called it God, God of Israel. He said, "You are God above, and I am God below." Rav Huna said in the name of Vayishlach, no one has the right to usurp such authority for himself. The next day, his daughter went out and was raped.
So if you look back at the beginning of chapter 34, which was page 206, the line immediately preceding, and remember, there are no chapter breaks in the Torah. There are paragraph breaks occasionally, but you don't get, chapter 34, chapter 33 in big bold letters or anything. It's just all running together. It's immediately before that is talking about him purchasing this plot of land and him erecting an altar, and this rather unusual name that he gives it of El Elohei Yisrael. And the commentary is picking up on it. Reish Lakish says, when he says that, when he names it as that, he is saying, God is God on high, and I am God on low. Jacob is essentially claiming for himself as being numero dos, that he's number two. God may be God up there, but I'm God here.
I don't see where you get that
From
the commentary. From what?
I mean, how does the commentary get that?
Yeah.
Essentially, it's getting it by the doubling of the word God. Right? And he called it God, God Israel. Who's Israel? That's Jacob's new name. So there's God, and then there's God of Israel, and that's me.
I think that's just looking for something where there's nothing there.
Well, remember, they're trying to figure out why would this event happen, where it happens in the arrangement of the Torah. Well, what happens right before it is often a clue, right? It's how we work out causality, right? If I stub my toe, if I feel pain in my foot, and then I remember that I stubbed my toe 3 seconds ago, I'm going to associate the pain in my foot with the stubbing. Well, if I see that Dinah has been raped, I'm going to try and figure out that what happened before it that could have caused it. And this is the explanation that's being done. Skeptical?
Very.
Very skeptical. Okay. So, first of all,
that's my problem with religion, I think.
well, first of all, we have to remember, as we've said numerous times, but it really is important to keep repeating it, not every commentary is meant to provide a journalistic account of the events. That is to say, Reish Lakish may have used this as an explanation for what it means to be arrogant, not an explanation for what actually happened and why. And he may have been using this juxtaposition as a hook for a teaching about human arrogance, not for trying to explain the literal events that happened in Jacob's family. So if we don't buy it as an explanation for why Dinah was raped, we can still buy it, as it were, as a truthful statement that one should not set themselves up as thinking that they are God of earth, that you're somehow equal to God in some measure or some way. Because if you do, chances are you are going to stumble into bad things. And arrogance does have a way of causing that. Maybe? All right, we're not happy. That's why we put this at the first one, okay? We'll move on. Let's see if we can get something else for Jacob here.
That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons.
This is all the way back in our earlier discussion. And remember, Benjamin hasn't been born yet. That's why there's only 11 sons.
Where then was Dinah?
Right?
He
It
put
didn't
her,
say took his 11 sons and Dinah. It just says took his 11 sons.
so where then was Dinah? He put her in the chest, saying, "This wicked man has an aspiring eye. Let him not take her away from me."
That would be Esau. He's worried that Esau is going to see Dinah and go, oh, can't whistle, and go, wow, she's great. And remember, he doesn't know what Esau is going to be like and what he's going to be doing. He just knows what Esau has been in the past. So he's afraid that Esau is going to take his daughter. So he's locked her up.
Rav Huna said, in the name of Rav Abba Bardella HaKohen, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, "He who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty." From Job. You have withheld kindness from your friend. You have withheld kindness from your brother.
All right, pause. What does he mean by you withheld kindness from your brother?
You withheld your daughter.
You should have let her have it. Should have let him have her. You should not have locked her away. And if your brother had truly become enamored and wanted to take her, to be married to her, you should have let it. You should not have locked her in the chest, is what this commentary is saying. Why not? Keep reading.
You have withheld kindness from your brother when you gave her in marriage to Job. Did you not convert him? You wouldn't give her in marriage to a circumcised person, Asa. She is now married to an uncircumcised one. You wouldn't give her an illegitimate wedlock. Lo, she is now taken in illegitimate fashion.
Following the line of logic here? Right, so what's that?
To some degree.
To some degree. So the Midrash is saying that Jacob should not have been so suspicious of Esau and locked his daughter away because, A, according to another Midrash, Dinah was eventually married to Job as the second wife, and she converted him. She made Job a good person. She helped him. So maybe Dinah would have helped Esau, right? If Esau had had a decent wife like Dinah, maybe Esau wouldn't have ended up being such a wretch. So think of what you've done to your brother by not allowing him to potentially have this option. And Esau, after all, was your brother. He was one of us. He was circumcised. It means, within the tribe. I mean, yeah, there are some issues between the family, but at least he was within. And because you wouldn't do that kindness for your brother, because you wouldn't do that kindness for a friend, then everything you feared that would have happened is going to happen. She will be taken by force, and she will be taken by someone much worse than Esau would have been. Not looking at too many happy faces here. No? Don't like this as...
But I have a question. It makes a comment about her being married to Job.
Right?
Who was uncircumcised.
Correct.
If it was such an issue for her brothers
Mhm.
and father in the other case of Shem, why wasn't it an issue in the case of Job?
Well, for the brothers, it wasn't as much of an issue as an excuse to get them to weaken themselves.
Okay, but it was,
But there was a definite feeling that the people of Canaan, the people of Canaan, were especially problematic. That was why, remember, Jacob had to leave to get a wife somewhere else. So uncircumcised here is really a stand-in for people of Canaan, which were considered to be just built in as evil. But you're right; it's a little fuzzy. And again, it's talking about if you're unwilling to be generous or helpful to a friend or a family member, then what you fear will eventually come to pass, probably in a worse way than you imagined. That's the message of this Midrash. Again, just like our first one, I don't believe the rabbis were necessarily saying this is a one-to-one explanation for why it happened. Because after all, if they really were arguing about what was the true explanation of why it really happened, why do we have more than one explanation? Right, we've got two different explanations, and here even from the same book, that are saying why this happened, and we've got a whole another page and a half to go of other explanations. So again, they're looking for lessons that we can learn not necessarily the journalistic account of what actually happened and why. And that can be very confusing because we get caught up on whether it matches the facts of the case well enough rather than whether it matches reality in terms of the lesson that it's trying to give us. And that lesson of being stingy with our generosity with friends and family will come back to bite you is a pretty good lesson. We're just not 100% sure whether it applies literally to the case of Dina. Does that make sense?
Can I bring you another problem for me?
Please.
Isn't Esau her uncle?
Yes.
Would that be kosher?
Not now, no. Mostly. So there were different categories of marital permissibility in the ancient world. There were some that were different before the giving of Torah, and some even after the giving of Torah that were permissible, that have long since fallen into disuse, you might say. So problem now? Absolutely. Problem then? No, it could have been okay. Again, not that we would ever do such a thing. All right, onward. Oh, it's rough finding a good excuse here. I mean, we've got to get someone to blame.
Jacob's having built himself a house in Sukkot and his purchase of real estate had given the impression that he intended to settle in that vicinity permanently. His duty at that time had been to proceed to Bethel to pay his vow of 34 years ago.
Remember, when he left his home and he had that dream with the ladder and he put the rock under his head and he said, this is going to be an altar and I vow to God I will, do all of this if God is with me. Well, he hasn't fulfilled that yet. And now he's sort of meandering his way back to that area, but it doesn't look like he's going very far.
He was supposed to proceed directly in the direction of his father's home without allowing himself to be distracted on the way. Having failed to do this, God punished him with the incident involving Dinah. Even though we explained that Jacob's punishment was due to his having experienced fear in spite of repeated assurances by God that he would be with him, this delay he had allowed himself was an additional reason for his being punished.
Okay, so why did Dinah get raped according to Radak?
Because he didn't go directly to Bethel.
Because he was slow in fulfilling his promise. He has had 34 years to work on this and he hasn't gotten it. And now that he's within reach, he's just dragging his feet. You need to be punished for this behavior.
But he punished the daughter. They punished the daughter, not the father.
Right. So one of the things that this introduces, which was a common belief in the ancient world, and in some ways still a belief in the modern world, is that our children are part of us. And that we feel punished if something bad happens to them. Now, in the ancient world, they believe that in a one-to-one sense, that your children are you, and therefore if they are hurt, it's the same as you being hurt. And the idea that they would be hurt on your account wasn't considered to be unfair, because you are linked. It's the same. It's like saying my right hand murdered someone and then someone cut off my left arm. I don't say, well, the right arm is the one that should have been cut off. It's all part of me. So if this gets punished, even though this did the act, it's still punishment. And it's still part of the totality. Now, we tend to view ourselves and our families a little bit more individualistically in the modern world. And we certainly see from later prophets like Ezekiel that children will not be punished for the sins of their parents as a clearer demarcation of where transgressions spread. But we do still have a notion that our children are us. And we do still feel punished when bad things happen to our kids. What did I do wrong that such and such happened? Now, it may not be that we would think I didn't fulfill a vow and that's why my daughter was raped. We may not tie two things that are so disparate together, but we do still feel punished by our children's suffering. Or at least it's not uncommon for people to have those feelings. So it's not quite the same feeling that might have been in the ancient world, but we do still share much of that emotional connection. But we're still not looking at a lot of happy faces for this explanation. Okay, so, well, there's a little bit more we can tag on to this explanation. So, Michael, keep reading.
Like all who delayed fulfilling a vow, he therefore was punished by experiencing all three of the cardinal sins of idolatry, forbidden sexual relations, and bloodshed.
Right, remember, there are 3 sins that a Jew is supposed to die, lay down their life rather than commit. There's 3 that we're not supposed to transgress. You know, all the other ones, if someone says, transgress this or I'll kill you, we transgress. You know, build me a fire on Shabbat. You build a fire. Eat this pork. Eat the pork. No problem. But these are the 3 that we're supposed to say, go ahead and kill me. And yet, because Jacob delayed in fulfilling his vow, according to the Midrash, he suffers, as all do who delay in fulfilling their vow, says the Midrash, from these 3 sins happening to him against his will, which are?
Forbidden sexual relations by Shechem's rape of Dinah, bloodshed, the ensuing slaughter of the inhabitants of Shechem by Simeon and Levi, and idolatry. Following this massacre, Jacob commands all members of his household to rid themselves of foreign gods.
Which happens in the verses that follow from where we left off our reading. But notice that they're saying that part of his punishment was the murder of the inhabitants of Shechem. That he was punished by his children, his sons, becoming murderers. It wasn't just as you might have thought, you're being punished by your daughter being raped, you're being punished by your children being murdered. It was, you're being punished by your children being murderers. And the text is being very clear that's considered to be unlawful bloodshed. That the Shimon and Levi were behaving as murderers in that case. It's an interesting tact on what it means to be punished, to have your children do something that bad, as opposed to have something that bad happen to your children. Still not a lot of happy faces. All right. So is Jacob off the hook? I mean, whatever he did, we can't say that he's responsible for this. That maybe he should have paid off his vows. Maybe he shouldn't have been stingy with his brother. Maybe he shouldn't have been too arrogant. But we're not happy making a one-to-one connection with his behavior and his daughter's rape, are we? No. We can learn a lot of lessons from his life and his mistakes, but it doesn't really seem like we would call him the guilty party. All right, let's try another suspect.
Okay. Vayishlach said to Rabbi Yossi, "What's the meaning of everyone shall use this proverb against you, saying, as the mother, so the daughter?" From Ezekiel. He said to him, "There is no cow that whores unless her calf kicks. There is no woman who turns into a whore unless her daughter commits an act of prostitution."
Which is basically saying the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That if the mother's like that, the daughter's like that, and if the daughter's like that, you can bet the mother's like that too. That you know one from the other. A chip off the old block. Little rough? Yeah. Well, hold on.
He said to him, "If that is the case, was our matriarch Leah a whore?" He said to them, "Indeed so."
Right? I mean, because Dinah got raped, she got abused. So doesn't that mean that if it's a one-to-one relationship, that her mother must have also been involved in such activities? And the answer is, yeah, according to this drush.
He said to them, "Indeed so, for it is written, and Leah went out to meet him. She went out all made up to meet him, just like a whore."
So you may remember this segment from last week's Torah reading when she barters the mandrakes that would be used as a fertility aid for Rachel for that night having Jacob come to her tent. And when Jacob comes back to the camp, it says she goes out and says, "I've bought you with the mandrakes today. In here, buddy." And basically Rabbi Yossi is saying that's a rather whorish thing to do.
Even if you're married.
Even if you're married, the fact that she did it so publicly, the fact that she went out, which is the word that they're dwelling on here, and the fact that she is talking publicly about what they're going to be doing privately, was considered to be an inappropriate behavior for a good girl. And therefore,
That is why it is written, "And Dinah, daughter of Leah, whom she had born to Jacob, went out."
and they're
There's
saying,
something about that phrase, "went out," that has more meaning.
you go out, and you go out dressed like that, you go out acting like that, what do you think is going to happen? And if the mom did that, what do you think is going to happen to the girl? Right? She's going to fall into the same trap. So this is saying basically that Dina learned from her mother, and her mother was that kind of person, so we shouldn't be surprised that Dina was that kind of person too. So it's Leah's fault, right? No one's happy. No. Now this is a very uncomfortable interpretation. Certainly we do believe, and again, I think this is one of the main lessons that's trying to be brought here, we do believe that the behavior and actions of the parent have a profound impact and influence on the behavior and actions of the children, right? A parent who spends all of their time involved with substance abuse, or who is abusive to their spouse, will often find that their children will grow up engaged in substance abuse or abusive to their spouse, or imitating in many other ways the behavior of their parents. That lesson, I think we can all agree, is quite true. And the parents have a responsibility to therefore make sure that their children are given the best example possible. But to say that it's inevitable, to say that it's responsible for that, well, it's a stretch. Again, it's a stretch only if we're looking for a literal journalistic account and accountability. But if we're trying to remind people of the consequences of our behavior on our children, then it's a perfectly fine sentiment to convey, even if we don't perhaps enjoy the vehicle that they're bringing it to us in. You got to take off. No problem. No problem. We're moving to our third reader. What do you think, Sandy? You okay? We're on the second paragraph. God asked Leah.
God asked Leah, "This is the reward of her good deed. This is the reward of your sister Rachel, who gave you her signs with her husband, to bear you embarrassment on your wedding night. As punishment for this behavior, God caused Leah even greater embarrassment at the episode of Dina."
So when Leah negotiates the mandrakes for Jacob's intimacy, the Midrash is saying that God is rather upset with that. Like, your sister wants the mandrakes to help her to be able to have children, and you're bartering over this? Why didn't you just give it to her? It just seems so egregious, and especially based upon earlier Midrashim that said that Leah and Rachel had to work out a system where Rachel could give Leah the signs, the secret handshake, if you will, in order to convince Jacob that that was actually Rachel, in order to prevent Leah from being humiliated by Lavan using her as a substitute. So Rachel was willing to sacrifice her own happiness with Jacob in order to help her sister. And here her sister Leah is bartering over some roots. And God is saying, if you think that's bad, just wait to see what's going to happen. Right? If you're going to behave this way, then you are going to end up suffering even worse, which, of course, is what happens. So again, so Leah's fault then, right? Yeah. Again, it's teaching us a very powerful lesson about what it means to reciprocate someone else's help, someone else's generosity, what it means to be grateful. Does it really explain the literal events in this story so well? I don't see a lot of love for it. Okay. Onward then.
Dina's fathers and brothers would sit in the academy and study, while she preferred to go out and see the daughters of the land. And Dina went out of her own accord.
All right, so according to Avot Rabbi Natan, according to Ibn Ezra, she liked going out. So what did you expect to happen? She was supposed to stay at home. You go out, bad boys are going to happen. So it's Dina's fault, right? If only she'd stayed home like a good girl should. Yes? No? Is this? I mean, we can maybe stipulate in a practical matter that yes, if she hadn't gone out, then he couldn't have raped her. But to say that that makes it her fault, I'm guessing that most of us are uncomfortable with actually saying that it's a fault. That it's technically true that if I never leave the house, I won't be hit by a car. but that doesn't mean that my leaving the house excuses the drunk driver who hits me from any responsibility. He can't say, well, you should have stayed home, any more than I think we're comfortable with this. Again, it's emphasizing that one should be careful when one goes out. One needs to be aware that the rest of the world is not always a happy, wonderful, pleasant place. There are some uncomfortable and unpleasant characters in the world. That, again, it's trying to bring home very carefully to us. Whether or not we would say fault, I don't think we would want to say that this was Dina's fault for daring to leave her house. But it is a helpful reminder of the difficulties of the world. All right, let's keep going.
Okay. Well, Jacob and his sons were sitting in the house flooring, occupied with the study of Torah. Dinah went abroad to see the dancing and singing women who Shechem had hired to dance and play in the streets in order to entice her forth.
All right, so from Ginsburg's compilation, The Legends of the Jews, why did she go out?
She wasn't studying. She wasn't studying.
She wasn't studying, but remember, girls weren't usually studying anyway at that point.
Right.
She wanted to be part of the dancing and the singing.
And why were the dancing and singers there?
Because
Apparently he had hired them.
Shechem had hired
It was a
Jewish
ploy. It was a
vice
ploy.
Yeah.
It was a plan. It wasn't that the girls of the land just happened to be walking by at that time. Shechem had seen her and said, I like her, I want her, I must have her, but I need to get her out of there because I can't just go break into their tent and take her. So I will send some ladies by who will be dancing and singing, and she will think this is wonderful and great and safe, because after all, it's just a group of other women from the area, and she'll go out for this girls' night out, and then I can get her because she'll be away from the safety. So it doesn't say that Dinah was wrong for wanting to go out. It says Shechem was using this as a deliberate lure, as a deliberate ploy, which makes it a little bit less than the spontaneous act that it seemed to be when we first read through the story. Right? When we first read the story, it was Dinah went out, Shechem saw her, he took her. Here it's Dinah only went out because he was staging the events in order to get her out because he intended to rape her all along. That gives a little bit more guilt to him, doesn't it? Perhaps, maybe.
Yeah, but you got rid of him.
What's that?
You got rid of it. Well,
I haven't erased
that's
him
right,
yet.
That's right, he's still there.
He's still on this list. And I don't think we would erase him after that interpretation. We would definitely still say
No, he's
still at fault.
he's the guilty party.
He still seems to be at
because
fault.
let's face it, he did it.
He's one of the fraternity boys.
Yeah, right, right.
And unfortunately, you speak a lot of truth that many of the fraternity parties are deliberately thrown
Oh, yeah.
in order to attract women in to then do things that are inappropriate, to use a euphemism, which, given the topic, I'm not sure why we're bothering with the euphemism.
Yeah.
All right, but let's see who else might be responsible.
Hamor and Shechem said to the people, will not their cattle, their property, and all their beasts be ours? They had in mind to cheat, but were themselves cheated.
Right, so remember those phrases where they said, hey, we just marry them and then we get all their stuff. It seems to be that there was a general sense of collusion that if they could bond with Jacob's family, if they could bring them in, that they would be able to exploit that circumstance. They would be able to come out on top. So the people of the town, whether or not they were in on the rape, they certainly are in on allowing it to go further without punishing Shechem for what he did. I mean, think for a second, if you were a member of the town and Shechem had raped your daughter, do you think that this would be a satisfactory solution? That you would just sit down calmly and negotiate the betrothal of your daughter after such a thing happened? I don't think I would. But they're willing to exploit these strangers. That is to say, Jacob's family, our ancestors, because they can see that will benefit them in terms of wealth. But of course, those who try to cheat usually end up getting cheated. It's actually quite well known that most cons, most scams, are usually successful because of the greed of the person who is being scammed, not the scammer. The whole Nigerian prince scam thing. It's all about, I can make you think that you're going to get rich out of this shady deal. and therefore you'll participate. And once you get the person thinking already about the money that they're going to be able to get from this deal, then you can fleece them like no one's business. All right.
Okay. As regards the commandment laid upon Noahides
Remember, the Noahides are the non-Jews of the world.
to establish courts of justice, the duty is enjoined upon them to set up judges in each district. A Noahide who violates any of the 7 commandments is executed by decapitation with the sword. Therefore, all the inhabitants of Shechem were condemned to death by beheading, but Shechem had been guilty of kidnapping. They saw it, knew it, and failed to impose sentence upon him.
So Rambam's Mishnah Torah says the people of the town are guilty not for the rape, but they are still deserving of the murder that they receive, the punishment that they receive, because they should have imposed a penalty upon Shechem. Right? If a town refuses to impose justice upon those that have behaved like this in a way that everybody saw and knew, I mean, the guy's negotiating over the bride price. He's not denying that he did anything. And the woman is still held captive in his home. If they're refusing to engage in justice, then they are liable for punishment for refusing to have justice within their community. And Shimon and Levi were just implements of justice then. Does that make us feel better about Shimon and Levi's act? Maybe a little. Still, the Torah seems rather ambivalent towards it. And like I said, Jacob is unclear. And as far as in terms of status, Shimon and Levi definitely drop within the hierarchy of the tribes. But it does help us somewhat feel that, yes, that maybe the murder and wholesale destruction was inappropriate, but that the people of the town were not simply innocent bystanders to everything that was going on. Because there's no such thing as an innocent bystander when it comes to rape and kidnapping. If you stand by, you are guilty. And therefore, you should be punished as well. We can dicker about what that punishment should be, but the guilt seems to be quite clear. And I think that Rambam makes that case pretty persuasively. So,
Each of Jacob's
hold on. So,
Okay.
I know, I paused for a second. So the town, I don't think we can blame for the rape, although we can certainly blame it for creating an atmosphere and a culture where you didn't need to worry about justice. Which means the only person we're really left with as being responsible is Shechem himself, right? The man who actually chose to rape somebody is guilty for having done so, and no one else. Others may have contributed to the setup of the entire arrangement. They may have played their own roles in either shaping identities or creating circumstances of danger and tension, but he's the one who chose to act the way he did. He's the one who chose to take her by force. And as such, he bears the actual guilt for that crime. And it's important to remember that. It's easy to get carried away and lost in all of the midrashim and wonder who was actually to blame. And we need to remember that who was actually to blame was the guy who did it. We're going to leave then with one final statement about Dinah herself.
Each of Jacob's children were born together with his future spouse, except for Dinah, who was born alone. Therefore was said of her, this girl is with justice and judgment.
Right, with Din. So who was Dinah's twin? Who was she born with? Well, Dinah is the feminine form. So what would be the masculine form? Din. Justice or judgment. Right, so Dinah becomes the object around which justice and judgment is swirling. She becomes the focal point of one of the most involved narratives where justice is being sought. We end up perhaps more with vengeance than with justice because of the conflicting and confusing values. It's one of the sad states of human affairs is that when we are seeking to figure out whose fault something is, oftentimes other considerations than justice come into mind. Worthy considerations about wondering what happened in their past, how were they raised, what was the socioeconomic conditions that they're facing, what were other people doing that might have contributed to this, what about peer pressure, what about all these other things. And all of those are incredibly important and worthwhile questions for us to ask about our society over and over again, continually. Are we doing enough to ensure that everybody given a fair and good and equal opportunity in every single way. But when it comes down to it, when a crime has been committed, all of those other explanations and other attributions of fault and distributing of blame can't disguise who is actually the one who receives the judgment, who is the actual partner of Dinah, who receives the din, who receives the judgment, the person who did the crime. And regardless of what may have contributed to creating the circumstances where that crime would have happened, each individual is still responsible for the crime that they commit. And judgment has to be carried out. But we still have trouble realizing that. We still get caught up in blame and fault and a cloud of other considerations in numerous instances within our own country and within our own personal lives. But trying to refocus on the din, on the judgment, can sometimes refocus us a little bit more constructively than simply trying to distribute blame evenly.
Would you explain that paragraph to me?
Which one?
The last one.
It's based off of Midrash.
His children were born together with his future spouse. What's
So
that?
it's based upon a rather ambiguous Midrash that says that each of the children were actually twins, that each one of the boys had a girl with him that was born as well. Spouse is a bit of an iffy word. Now, what they're trying to pick up on here is the fact that who did Jacob's children marry? Right? Remember, Isaac had to get a wife from the old country, and Jacob had to get a wife from the old country. Well, now we've got 12 boys. Who are they marrying? And so the Midrash posited, not that brother and sister relationships are good, but that there were other women that came into the family at the time of the birth of each child that became their future spouse, in order to explain why the brothers didn't have to all go back and find a spouse from somewhere else as well. So again, we shouldn't read this literally as being their sister was their spouse, but the notion was that another person was added so that when they came back, they had wives ready for them, for each of them. But Dinah had no one. There was no one provided for Dinah. So who would she marry? And in the it ends up that she is marrying judgment, because the husband is a rapist, and then the Midrashim have to find other more suitable husbands, and it gets a little bit more complicated of who she might have ended up marrying. One explanation we mentioned was Job. Another is Shimon himself, or being at least cared for by Shimon, which was her brother. But the main focal point of why I wanted to bring this here was this notion of we have to focus on the judgment with Dinah rather than the blame. That's her partner. Is that cleared up a little bit? Yeah, it's like I said, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. But this entire chapter is one of the most difficult ones to get through. So thank you for sticking it out. A reminder that we are having our first Boundless Judaism course tonight. And for those of you that are watching us on YouTube, we are planning to try and stream it, but we don't have as good wireless in that part of the building. So if we can't stream it, we will record it and upload it later. Take care.
We're going to see Phantom of the Opera tonight.
Oh.
Tonight's the opening night
Uh-huh.
of Phantom at the Dr. Phil